Okay. Okay, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me out here. It really is a pleasure to come out and see a thriving chapter like this. Um, I started with OWASP when it was just a mailing list, and there were about 20 people on there, and they were arguing about AppSec. And one of the ideas they had was to build a training environment for people to learn about AppSec. And I had already built one. It was WebGoat. And so I didn't know anything about open source, but I thought, you know what? If they build one, then nobody's ever going to use mine. So I'll just donate mine to OWASP and make it open source. And I didn't really know how that all worked, but it was fantastic. People started using it. They started raining compliments down on me and my company, which is, I just started a consulting company. And they were like, wow, these guys really know their stuff. And so I got really hooked on the idea of doing well by doing good. And we contributed over the aspect, my company contributed tons of projects and research to OWASP over the first years. And it was hugely rewarding for me and my company and for a whole generation of AppSec leaders. So I highly encourage you to get involved. It will pay back multifold, both in just the connections that you make, as well as the contribution that you make to society. I feel incredibly proud for creating the OWASP Top 10 and WebGoat and ASVS, which you just mentioned, and starting the OWASP Foundation and setting up the chapters program and a million other things that I did the 10 years that I was leading the organization. I was happy to step down though. Once I felt like I got it working right, I turned it over, and OWASP has been growing, continuously growing since that time. So it's really exciting to see you guys here and thriving. How about the food? I've been to a lot of OWASP meetings, and this is by far the best food. So thank you. Really, really good. Okay. I'm not going to bore you with more of my background. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn if you want. Check out my profile. I want to talk about some really big problems in AppSec today. So I'm going to jump into this. Oh, actually, before we do this, I want to ask, if you're in AppSec or you're here at this meeting, why are you here? Why do you care about software security? You wanted to hear me talk. It's not a bad reason, but how about anybody else? Like, what makes you want to make software better? Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I resonate with that. Like, I like finding vulnerabilities in software. I feel like I'm solving something, making the world a little better. Like I've over the years, I did tons of pen testing and code review, and I found thousands of vulnerabilities, and it's always rewarding. It's exciting, right? Like make the world a little better.
Life is running on software.
That's, yeah, that you're actually stealing my thunder. I was hoping like, thanks, you ruined it. The reason I do AppSec is because of exactly that. Is we blindly trust software with almost everything important in our lives. Finances, your healthcare, your government, your social life, your elections, your national defense, everything is run in software. And quite frankly, we suck at writing secure software. So I wrote the OWASP Top 10, the first version, in 2002. It's the same stuff in there today, basically. The orders jumble around a little bit. Still SQL injection, still cross-site scripting, still authentication and access control. It's the same stuff. That's terrifying to me. I had this idea in my head when I wrote it. Honest to God, I had talked to these government agencies, and I was like, you got to do AppSec, morons. And they were like, well, we're busy with the SANS top 20 right now. And I was like, okay, I guess we need a top 10 of our own. So I just wrote one, and like a week later we published it, and OWASP got slash dotted. If you guys remember what that is, look it up if you're young. But that sort of started the whole journey. But I had this idea that we'd work on the top 10, and like maybe we'd knock a couple off, like solve them, And then we'd add a couple more, and we were going to raise the bar over time so that people would be a reasonable level of security. But it never happened. And accidentally, we created a ceiling instead of a floor, right? Like the top 10 was supposed to be the unforgivable software sins. And instead, it turned into a ceiling that people aspire to meet still today. That's a disaster. So while I am super proud of OWASP and all the great research and the minds that have come together and the meetings that we've had and the projects that we've created, we haven't made a dent, not a bit. The software, I mean, honestly, the software of the world today is at least as insecure as it was 25 years ago. God, it sucks to say that. 25 years ago. So we got a lot of work to do. We got to change some things because what we've been doing is not working. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is why I care, is I want a better world. I want the world safe for my kids to use software. So I want to talk a little bit about castles, because you see this analogy all the time, is people treat security like a castle. You've probably heard a talk that talked about like, oh, we're securing apps because an app is like a castle. And it's got defenses, and you guys know how we secure stuff, right? We identify the threats, we identify defenses to counter the threats, we make an architecture out of it, we do some testing, we monitor it in production, and we've got processes, and we know how to do this. This is how you build secure stuff. And companies have latched on to this idea that it's like a castle, and we've got a bunch of defenses that we use. Actually, I think it's kind of funny. Like you can find a zillion of these online if you look, because everyone wants it to be like a castle. So this one's cool. It's got it says the wall here is a firewall, and you got security layers with an inner wall, and there's scanning is, I don't know why the scanning is like a big hole in the, I don't know, but they're all your little strained analogies. But this one I think is cool because it really goes all in. It's like, you've got the moat and the defenses. It goes all the way around, and then you got I don't know, the keep is the backups. That's not an exact match, but I like the crown jewels. Like that's your data somewhere, I guess. This one's funny to me because none of these things are anything like a castle. There's like system hardening, user authentication, encryption, audit logs. I don't, it's just weird. It's just a picture of a castle with arrows. Like you could just move all those around anywhere and it wouldn't make any goddamn difference. Now this one takes it to the next level. This one, you got the castle, but then over here, you got like all the people and the teams and stuff. So you got the king and the queen setting policy. You got the backups in the archives. You got the clerks are for security monitoring. And I'm pretty sure whoever made this picture is a vulnerability scanner because they're the knights. They're the cool ones, right? They're out on quests. I had to put this one because it cracks me up. This, you see, it's the same thing, the castle, but then it's got, oh, you can't really see it up here because of this thing. There's an airplane up here with, like a bomber up here with sensors and bombs. And I'm like, how is that? How are you going to be in a castle? It's not going to protect you if there's bombers out there. So they just like sort of ruined their own analogy. I think it's probably okay for the rest of the slides. Oh, good job. So let's have a round of applause. Yeah, thank you. Now the clicker's not working though. I'm not even kidding. You broke it.
Another applause.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little history lesson in, we know how to build castles securely, right? And we use the same approach to build secure software, basically. And back in the dark ages, when I got my first job, the DoD produced something called the Rainbow Series. And there's like, I don't know, 50 or 60 different manuals that were put out by the NSA. And they knew more about security than we will ever know. I studied all of these things, and I think I'm like the last one to do it because like everybody else has got a big gray beard and is retired. And I worked directly for the guy that wrote the Orange Book, by the way, which was a cool experience. I got to learn a lot, but they knew more about access control, I promise you, than anybody knows today. They have, formal models on how to build software securely and zillions of activities here, well-defined, formally defined. I mean, it's really, it's way off the charts. So that was great, except nobody ever did it. Like there was only one product ever certified A1, Boeing MLS LAN, and so it was really hard and very expensive, and it just never really took off. So some years later, the maturity model craze happened. People were doing maturity models. So the OpenSAM has, I don't know, 120 different activities in it. It's a lot. I don't know how many activities your AppSec program has. It's probably not 120. But it's a very detailed model of here's everything you got to do to be, to build secure castles, right? And nobody ever did it because it's way too much. It's way too hard. Not surprisingly, the folks that made this model work for consulting companies, and they made an awful lot of money selling consulting services to implement all these activities. But I would say this didn't really produce any results. It just created a lot of make work, right? Like a lot of activities without results. Then DevSecOps sort of hit. That was an interesting idea. Strongly encourage you to read like the Phoenix Project and learn about DevOps. I know there's some DevOps engineers here. Really promising, but I think never really hit home. Lots of, just never a good match between security and it never really got integrated, I think. So people ended up saying, well, DevSecOps is just if I run my scan in a pipeline and bang, we're DevSecOps. And that's really not it. It's not it. Just sort of takeaway on that subject in case it comes up. DevOps transformed the way we used to do software back here from waterfall into, break down the silos and really change the way we build software. DevSecOps should have been a re-engineering of this stuff, a different way of doing the work, but really it didn't change anything. It should have done exactly what we did for software, break it down into small pieces to achieve flow, create tight feedback loops, and create a culture of innovation and learning. Those are the three, tenets of DevOps. And we could have done exactly that for security work, but we didn't do it. It's just, add a scanner to your pipeline, and that's it. So the NIST Secure Software Development Framework, SSDF, came out a few years ago, and it's simpler. It's only like 40 practices. Notice the trend here. We're getting dumber. And these 40 practices, I mean, they're fine things. They're all part of the castle philosophy, but it's simpler. And actually, if you look at the regulation that came out after the Biden Cybersecurity Act that said you have to do SBOMs and stuff like that, you probably remember some of that. In there, it said you got to sign an attestation that the software you built is secure. And that attestation was supposed to be that you did some of the practices in the NIST SSDF. Guess how many practices you have to do in order, 5, yeah, I think it's 4, it's like right there. So we went from, like 60 whole manuals of stuff down to like 4, which is crazy. And PCI SSF is another different model. It's just the point is we know how to build secure software, right? We know how to do it. Unfortunately, it's not working. We've been doing this for, 40 years now, and it doesn't work. Here's the results of just a few stats, just to get your mind thinking about it. I broke them down into development, security, and operations, just so we can kind of get a sense. But in development, the average organization has 1.1 million vulnerabilities in their backlog that they're not fixing. That's a stat from Ponemon. Only 5% of the things that we find with our tools are actually exploitable in production. All those libraries with vulnerabilities, all those scans that you run with your static and dynamic tools, just a tiny percentage of those is actually exploitable. And this is crazy. IDC published a study that says 19% of developer time is spent on security tasks. That's absolutely massive cost. It's like 1 in 5 of your developers is just doing security all the time. And we're slowing down pipelines. We're actually slowing down software without really having much impact. Like in order to get these results, we're adversely affecting software development, which is crazy. Now, security, I'd say poor relationship with development. Anybody want to fight me on that? I wish it was different because I really feel like I worked hard to, to understand developers when I was giving them feedback and so on and working with them. But what? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there are very few companies that were like that, even 20 years ago, because I was actively doing it. I mean, 20 years ago, the internet was just getting off the ground and people were writing web apps and web APIs that were really, really, really insecure. I'd say security is isolated from operations. Like, this is weird, but almost all the AppSec talks that you see and the work that goes on and the workflows that people are doing are on the code in development. They're not protecting apps in production. All we have over here is a WAF. Who thinks WAFs are like an awesome security protection for your web apps and web APIs? They're really not. They're super bypassable. They're just sit at the perimeter. And if you've ever looked at web traffic, just in a burp proxy or something, it's really complicated now, like serialized objects and XML and JSON and protobuf. And how is the WAF going to see into that traffic and decide, hey, there's a SQL injection buried deep in there? They just can't see it. So it's interesting. Not much operations focus. And in the operations side, they're not like the ops teams that I talk to, they don't want to deal with AppSec, which is weird. You can go in and then tell them like, hey, you're being attacked. Every app's getting attacked. And they're like, well, that's not us. That's the AppSec team. But the AppSec team is not accepting responsibility for dealing with those attacks. So there's a little bit of this going on. And we got to resolve that because stopping attacks in production is where the rubber hits the road. This is really important. And AppSec is really important here. It's the second leading cause of breaches now. So AppSec is ramping up. I think it just overtook phishing in terms of how many breaches were sourced to a kind of problem. AppSec is the second leading cause. So really important. We're really not doing anything. By the way, if you have any questions or just want to chime in, please do. I love taking questions. So I want to change the mindset. Applications are not like castles. When you think about your application layer, I want you to think of it like a city and think about how you go about securing a city, right? It's not all done in the plans and the Parks and Rec department. It's done live with cops and gates and sensors and guns and stuff. That's how you secure a city. The city is way too big to analyze and understand. It's just too complicated. It's constantly changing. So, these buildings are getting knocked down, new wires are getting installed, tunnels are being built, new data is being stored all over your city. It's complicated. And you can't look at one little piece of it at a time and really understand what's going on. So I want you to think about it like a city. And it is always under attack. And that's the way that you should think about your applications. You may not see it, but I guarantee you your apps and APIs are always under attack. We measured it in a study we published a couple months ago. On average, application gets attacked every 3 minutes. And that's not just the critical ones. That's like all the little boring baloney ones, the lunchroom cafeteria menu. They're all getting attacked. And we'll dig a little bit more into that. So we're gonna drill into the city analogy a little bit. First, I wanted to go to the interactive portion of this talk and give you a little quiz. So which one of these statements is true? Close. Which one? This one. You sure? How do you know that? That's the problem. All of these are believable. Someone believed these for a long time, like hundreds or thousands of years. I don't know exactly, but they're all intuitive, right? You want to believe them because it makes sense, but they're not true. They're absolutely not true. And I'm going to talk a little bit about shifting left. This has happened before. APM tools, like when I was doing, working on mainframes and stuff, we hired performance engineers to come in, and they would come in with a suitcase and they'd set up and they'd work for like 2 months, and then they'd give you a PDF report and they'd say like, you need to fix the gangly wrench with a Spritzen hammer or whatever. And like, we'd make whatever adjustments and maybe we get a little performance boost, but it was an awful process. And APM tools came out and tried to arm developers with better tools like I can't, the early ones I can't really remember, like New Relic and AppDynamics and so on. They were trying to help developers write better performant code. But the problem is that you can't really test performance in development because you don't have the context to do it. To really understand performance, you've got to have a fully assembled application with real data and real infrastructure and real backend connections and real users and real threats even. And so very well, over the course of a few years, they realized this and they started selling to production. And the operations teams would deploy these products and measure performance in production and feed the data to development. Now, which of those sounds like the way we do AppSec? I think we're sort of like in this stage and maybe a little bit here. Like we're trying to get developers to do it, but we're missing all the context that comes from production. Production is when we know things are real. We know things are exploitable in production because we can watch it, but we don't have that data because we don't have any sensors over here, which is crazy. We're running all our scans here. Everybody with me on this? Okay, there are a lot of problems like this that you can't shift them left because you need more context. And the context you need is here. So even though it seems super intuitive, like I want to shift it left, I want the developers to fix it early on. They can't. They don't have the data. They don't have the understanding to be able to fix the problems there. We're underwater. I mean, if you've got 1.1 million vulnerabilities in your backlog, you don't have time to be fooling around with fixing the 95% of those that aren't real and aren't exploitable. You got to focus on the ones that are real. And that's what I want companies to do is change their focus so they can identify the things that are real and fix those. Does that make any sense, folks? You realize this is heresy, by the way. I just want, I could get struck down at any moment. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have tools in which we can put scanning.
Yeah.
In the code, which can detect a lot of the vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
What's your thought that shifting left is not happening?
Yeah. So I'm trying to. It's very intuitive what you're saying. That seems like it should work, but it doesn't. Every company that I've worked with over the last 15 years has gradually ended up with a monumental pile of unfixed vulnerabilities because the static tools throw off lots of false positives. They take work to investigate. So very few companies have overcome that. I know, I won't say their names. I should say their names, but I won't. But like, they're big companies that have big AppSec teams, like 50 engineers plus a team in Dubai. That's all they do is review static analysis findings, and they've overcome this problem by brute force. But the underlying process is broken. They're doing a lot of work that doesn't make anything better. I spent a number of years triaging static analysis findings. and it sucks. It's the worst work ever. And it doesn't provide any value. If you find a false positive and spend 6 hours verifying that it's a false positive, at the end of the day, what did you make better? Not even the static analysis tool, because they're not getting better. Actually, interestingly, security tools are getting worse over time. Like, the big static analysis tools like Fortified, Checkmarks, and there's a few others, Veracode, like they did a lot of work to analyze applications and track data flow. And they still had a lot of false positives, but there's much newer tools. I think they would probably call them developer-centric tools, which run super fast and they find not very much stuff. They're not as good as the tools were 10 years ago, that's weird to me. But it makes sense if people can't tell the difference between the good results and bad results. So the market's kind of going sideways a little bit. But the point is, shift left, if you look at the outcomes, it doesn't work. We can argue about why, but just look at the numbers and you'll see it's not effective to follow the castle approach, and shifting left is kind of part of that mindset. Yeah.
Because it has not been implemented properly or fundamentally. Or not.
I love this argument, by the way. This is fantastic. Go ahead.
Because our developers don't have enough training and experience in security and operation. And also security and production people get involved too late. It's not because shift left is not working. I think you have to, in my opinion, you have to have presentation from them upfront in the development stage so that the foundation is set properly and securely. And then if you wait all the way until it's in production, a lot of damage is done and it's going to be a lot more expensive to fix.
I disagree. We'll talk about that in a second, but I just want to address that quickly. Is we've been trying to do this castle approach for 40 years, and it doesn't work. The results are the same. Like I said, I wrote the OWASP top 10 in 2002. There's lots of companies that have tried, and nobody's getting it right. That, to me, that says there's a problem with the process. We've got to change something if we want different results. Yeah.
So are you saying we need smarter development?
No, that's not going to happen. Because they're already super smart. And actually, they're so smart, they're busy doing other things. Like, they have so much to learn. It's insane. We think security moves fast. Try development sometime. There's new frameworks every day. I totally respect developers. You'll never hear me disrespect a developer or say it's developers' fault or that they don't know enough or that we could train them into being more secure. Never going to happen. And by the way, I taught in-person secure coding classes for over a decade, thousands of developers. And I wouldn't put a lot of money on the fact that they're developing secure code.
Indicate only what's exploitable should be fixed. So if we could do that, take a first cut.
Let's put a pin in that. That's where I'm going. Thank you. That's a perfect segue. By the way, just yesterday, Gartner analyst posted this on LinkedIn and posted the research supporting this. Said shifting security left is dead. So if Gartner says it's got to be true, right? Right. I'm not sure if he means the buzzword shifting left is dead, or he proposed another term, shifting down, which I was just like, come on, enough with the shifting. But I do think it's interesting that there is a lot of support for the idea that shifting left is a failed experiment in trying to fix the problem. And by the way, the game has just changed. So on the left, we got AI powered developers now producing more code. Anybody read any stats on like how much more code they're producing?
Minus 20%. When you go back to review,
Possibly.
it's actually a loss.
Oh yeah, so yeah, functional code, but like code volume. But the trick is reviewing it, right? Yeah, I get it. So it's more to review, right? Like this wave is all the stuff you got to make sure is secure. So it's a lot more code. Like people are saying 40, 50, 60%. Say again? 80%. The estimates are all over, and you know why? Nobody knows. Like there's no way to measure it, right? Because you can just sit down with Claude code and work a little bit, check it in, and how do you know it's Claude code generated? But it's definitely more, and it's definitely not secure. Some good studies. There was a Veracode study out that analyzed the security of the code that gets produced by AI. It's not great. Most of them say it's like basically what humans would produce, which makes sense because it's trained on code that humans wrote. So that's one problem. And then there's AI-powered attackers launching more attacks because just you can give an AI a indication of where a vulnerability is, and it can generate exploits automatically. So we're almost certain to see faster, more interesting attacks coming into applications. And I like what I generated this with AI, of course, and I really like what it did with the flashlight and the shield and the hammer on backwards. That was really hilarious because that's what it feels like to me. It's like we got some bad tools. So I want to take a second and talk about how you secure a city. So Singapore is a fascinating city. It was not in good shape in the 70s and 80s. And they invested in creating a digital twin of their city. And I don't know if who's been to Singapore. So a few people. It's a city of the future, right? When I went there, I didn't know a lot about it, and I was kind of expecting like alleys with smoking things and stuff. And I don't know. I didn't have a good picture in mind. It's all Jetsons. It's shiny bridges and everything spotlessly clean. And there's it's perfect. It's amazing. And they've put all this work into smart transportation system, e-governance, sustainable energy, smart healthcare, advanced security and surveillance. That's a little ominous, but okay, I'll take it. Smart homes and buildings, all as part of one infrastructure, a digital twin of actually what's happening in production in their city. They can monitor it all, which is, I think, the key to unlocking their greatness here is all these parts of government are now working together off a single model that's gathering data electronically. It's truly amazing what they did. If you want to learn more about digital twins, they're used in a lot of industries where you're trying to manage something complex. Industrial factories use digital twins. Airlines use digital twins. It's a really fascinating concept, and there's a lot of work here. This, to me, is the path forward. So I think just like APM tools and cities, we got to get real. We got to focus on what's really happening in our cities. And I'll challenge any of you, who knows what's going on in your production environments at the application layer? Does anybody feel like they've really got a good handle on that? That's shocking, right? We just don't know. Software is the most complex thing man has ever created, by far. And we don't really instrument it very well. We don't know what's going on inside. Other complex things that man has built, like airplanes and space shuttles, even cars, they're all instrumented like crazy. Industrial factories have sensors for smoke, fire, heat, vibration, everything. They can tell when a machine is going to break before it breaks just by the sound change or the vibration change in the room. They can stop a problem before it happens. Wouldn't that be nice in AppSec? So I think the key here is we got to get instrumentation into our city. Here's how I think it works. So I want you to imagine in your head that we've got sensors gathering data. And this is really any kind of tool you can turn into a sensor. It could be old tools like SAS, DAST, SCA, and WAF. It could be non-security tools like CNAP and CMDB and APM tools. But most likely it's runtime security tools like ADR, IAST, and runtime SCA that are watching applications as they run, and they're gathering information about vulnerabilities and attacks and context and so on. And it doesn't matter. You take all that data and you feed it in. Probably you've got some kind of streaming data architecture. So this isn't run a scan and get a PDF file and feed it into something later. This is live telemetry coming in all the time. Hey, a new piece of code got deployed. Hey, there's a vulnerability in this line of code. Hey, there's a new library. Hey, something just disappeared. All that's telemetry that comes in. And we're going to talk about building a CKG, a contextual knowledge graph, out of that data. And then we're going to look at what we can use that for. So here's how I think about the CKG. It's like, you ever look at a blueprints for a house? You know, there's a framing plan and an electrical plan and a plumbing plan and a finish plan, like all those layers. It's a little bit like what we got here, right? There's like, and I think of different kinds of context. There's like the business context is like, what teams and businesses is this supporting? What assets are in that business that are important? What's the infrastructure that you've got? Is it cloud? Is it containers? Is it, where is it? What is it? This is kind of like whiz stuff. There's architecture context, which is like, how do things all connect to each other, and the blast radius of attacks and things. And then there's application layer intelligence, like how do the apps work? What do they do? Are there issues and incidents vulnerabilities and attacks happening? So those are interesting views. But wouldn't it be cool if you could, well, I got questions on the next one. So this is kind of all the information that you could think about collecting. This is all part of the sort of the ontology of application security. We want to pull all that information and build a model that we can ask questions. So what would you ask? If you had this, what questions would you ask about your application layer if you're like in a financial institution or something? Those are all great questions. Yeah, like where do I store PII? Show me a view of this. This is a graph, right? So I can say like, okay, well, let's focus in on the PII view or the PHI view of the data. And where am I seeing attacks? What are attackers targeting? Which systems? What attack vectors are they using? What vulnerabilities are they targeting? Those are all totally valid questions. You might ask, I got a bunch of questions here, like, which routes in the retail division require authentication? That'd be pretty cool. And the converse also true, like which ones don't have authentication, which they should. Note that it's not a vulnerability scan here. It's just collecting what's really happening. And then people can look at it and go, wait a minute, that's not right. That's what you do with business logic problems. You can't find them automatically with tools because it's the decision of the business. So what do? You make them visible. So you should be able to extract from your CKG what roles are required for each of the routes in every app you got. Build an access control matrix and then look at it and go, wait a minute, why are admins not authenticated here? Stuff like that. Where am I using encryption algorithms? Somebody asked me about quantum. You asked me about quantum earlier. Quantum's unsafe encryption is a big deal. A lot of organizations are going to have to switch out their encryption, which is like switching out the motor in a car. I talked to Deloitte and Accenture and EY and a bunch of big companies that have multi-million-dollar initiatives to go Y2K the shit out of quantum unsafe encryption. They have that. Well, NIST does it, but yeah.
But they've had a lot of winners in those competitions. Now imagine if I'm the government and I've got you doing quantum research, and you think it's gonna, you spend $1 trillion.
Can we just put a pin in that? I'll talk to you after this because it's a little off the topic of where I'm going. I just want to answer questions about what's going on in my city. We can talk afterwards about this, but I'll get all into it with you. But this is important. Like, show me what protocols are used to communicate with my apps and APIs and so on. So we need this capability to do AppSec efficiently. What's weird is, so I wanted to focus on threat modeling for just a second. So I spent a lot of years doing threat modeling. I think it's super fun. What's the biggest pain doing threat modeling? Actually, that's the fun part. Like, that's which threats are most likely to exploit, I think that's the fun, interesting part of threat modeling. There's a really boring part of threat modeling that takes forever. I just got gonged.
Putting all the threats in and eliminating the ones that are irrelevant.
Yeah, it's actually like the gathering of the data. Like, most app projects that you go talk to, they don't have like an architecture diagram that's up to date. It's 3 years old. And it doesn't work like that anymore because they started building a car and then they turned it into a helicopter mid-flight and added missiles, and it's a different thing. And so then you got to interview all the developers to try to find out how it's supposed to work. It takes weeks to gather the data. You can go into a threat modeling exercise and in a few hours, you can do a threat model and come up with some interesting facts, but you got to go into it with all this information. Imagine if you started your threat modeling with this, because you gather all this information from production automatically. You can cut down the time it takes to do your threat model dramatically. I'll give you a pen test example too, because I love this. Imagine you're testing an application and you're supposed to test it for, let's say, expression language injection. Anybody familiar with expression language injection? Well, it's a type of injection where you use a special syntax, you trick the application into running code that it's not supposed to run, right? So how do you find it? Well, if you're just doing a normal pen test, you got to go through every route, like every endpoint, every header, cookie, parameter, form field, and any other kind of input, and fuzz it like crazy to see if you can make it execute an expression that's buried in there. It takes forever. And that's just one kind of vulnerability. Like, it could take days. And what if you could ask this, could you show me the routes that have expressions evaluated on them? And it's 2. That would save you a ton of time. How about telling me which parameters go into those expressions? Okay, cool. Now you can just test that, be done, 5 minutes, because you know exactly what you're trying to test. So it's super white box, right? But I think we should do that. In fact, I think we can, here, I'll give another example of why this is beneficial. In AppSec, there's 2 kinds of vulnerabilities, and we score them very differently. One is vulnerabilities in libraries, CVEs. You guys familiar? And they get a CVSS score. And that's great. We use that CVSS score. Then there's vulnerabilities that we find in our custom code. Like, we pen test or code review and we write up a vulnerability. It'd be like SQL injection or something. And we score that. How do we score it? Anybody know? Like, I just found a SQL injection in my app. What is it? Critical, high, medium, low? What? Oh, like, yeah, likelihood times impact equals, yeah. You could do that. Say again? You have to calculate. Yeah. It is contextual. Yeah, thank you. That's exactly the answer I was looking for, right? Like, one SQL injection could be on an unauthenticated route and currently under attack in production and very easy to discover. Another one could be admin only, read-only database, never touched by an attacker ever. And those scores will be anywhere from critical to low. So I was thinking about it, and I wanted to see what's the effect of different factors on the score. This is using CVSS 4, and I did some math. And I said, let me generate a bunch of random CVSS vectors and see what effect it has if I change certain things. So if you turn on the this vulnerability has not been attacked yet field, so that, changing it from not defined, which it assumes that vulnerabilities have been attacked. So it's overscoring everything. But if you know it hasn't been attacked, you can turn this off. And what happens to the score is it drops incredibly. It drops by over 3 points. That's 55%. So you're moving down multiple categories. You'll see it's impossible to get a critical if the vulnerability is not under attack. And it's almost impossible to get a high if the vulnerability is not under attack. So what would that do to your vulnerability backlog if you could go through, all 1.1 million of them and rule out a million of them that are not currently being attacked? They would all go down to, low, medium scores, and you could put them on the back burner safely until somebody finds them and starts to attack them. But this is bizarre about the way that we do security, is we're treating every SQL injection like a critical. But that same vulnerability, if it was in a library and there was a CVSS for it, and we knew that CVSS was not being attacked, it would be a medium. Same vulnerability. We should score them the same way. And that means we could focus on these, the ones that are actually being attacked. So I want you to think of like turning down the volume on all of your backlog, except the ones that are under attack stay up high. So they spike out of your backlog, and you could fix those. The order that you fixed things would be very different. Because some of the mediums, a medium that's currently being exploited is probably more serious than a critical that's not being attacked. So we got to adjust the scores with context. And that's the key. That's what I'm trying to get across here, is the context that you need is in production. That's where we get the context. And that's how we streamline all of these activities.
And also look at the consequences.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah, all those factors are built into CVSS. There's like, I don't know how many, like 16 or 20 factors in CVSS before. And they chose those factors because they're predictors of likelihood of being discovered and attacked and the severity of the impact if successfully exploited. So I skipped a few steps, but that's what the CVSS scores are all about. And I'm just saying, when you look at the impact of the different factors, this one, is it under attack, has the biggest effect of all of these factors on the score. And so that's something we can find out in production. Is it currently being attacked? And it'll help us prioritize our work dramatically. So I don't have time in this talk to go through every AppSec workflow, but I want to try to show you that every AppSec workflow is streamlined by having a CKG. So instead of having separate workflows with separate data stores, one has a list of vulnerabilities, one's a threat model repository, one's a pen test thing, they're all separate from each other. And it drives me crazy because every pen test starts out with threat modeling, but nobody writes down the threat model. They just throw it away and deliver the list of vulnerabilities. AppSec is not a list of vulnerabilities. It's a graph of all the context, and the vulnerabilities are just one layer of that blueprint, right? So when I look at it, I chose the top, sort of the top 6 workflows in AppSec. They could do this for other ones. They all share. But what I wanted to try to show is that when you're doing a threat model, you pull information from the graph, and then you update the graph for everyone else, okay? So maybe you identify a few threats, they're updated in the graph. The developers, over here in vulnerability management can make a fix, and they share some stuff to the graph. Everybody's interacting with the same model, making it better for everybody. had a couple more examples, but, oh, so I just want to say, like, it makes all these activities dramatically easier. I said reduce 50% of the work. I think it's actually a lot more than that in some cases, like threat modeling and pen testing. Compliance, I can imagine, like, just printing out a compliance report directly off the graph, because we've gathered all the information to show that we tested everything, that there's no vulnerabilities. It's always up to date. So a lot less work to do things this way. And it scales because you can create a distributed architecture for gathering this information. Oh, I do want to share some real stats. So I think this is interesting. When we look at applications, we see this is per app per month. So we see hundreds of millions of security relevant behaviors in apps every month. We're just gathering data. Out of that, there's hundreds of thousands of things that are security relevant, like vulnerabilities and attacks and libraries and things like that we discover. We see 4,000 attacks per month per app. We calculated recently, it's like 1 every 3 minutes on applications. So that's a lot of attacks. Only a small percentage of those are actually viable attacks. So most of these attacks never reach the vulnerability that they're trying to get to, right? Like a SQL injection attack that never reaches a SQL database, who cares? So I want you to focus on these and not worry about the rest of this noise, right? And ultimately, this is what we see when you factor in all that context. Small number of new vulnerabilities every month, very manageable by teams. These are the ones that are actually higher critical risky. A small number of new CVEs in libraries, because did you know 62% of open source libraries are never used in an application? We monitor exactly how they're used. And I want you to focus on the 38% of them that are actually loaded into memory and run. The other ones, I don't care. It's not very risky. And a small number of real incidents where there's actually a vulnerability that got exploited and somebody tried to steal data or do damage or something like that. This is manageable when you do it this way. But if you're looking at numbers like this, nobody can keep up. So castles are for fairy tales. We can't secure code like it's a castle because it's more like a city. It's time for AppSec to grow up, leave the castle, and move to the city. So I want everyone here, I want you to pick up a shovel, instrument your city, and leave the theoretical world behind and make AppSec relevant, because it's been 30 years and I don't have that much longer of a career and I want to see it. So thank you very much. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to take any questions you guys have about anything, not just, I don't care. Let's have some people who didn't talk. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Maybe some folks that didn't get a chance to talk. Yeah.
This is thinking about the castles. Like, if you read old literature about castles, it's actually more like this. They're building a small city, so like the royal family knows everybody. Most of the people who work in the castles actually live in the city, right? They're every day to the castle.
Yeah, that's fair. And every analogy is like, hopefully you can see through the holes in my analogy because it's not perfect. Right. But I will say castles don't change very quickly. The software changes really, really fast. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at with the castle analogy is like, you can't secure it like a castle because tomorrow it's not going to be a castle. It's going to be a duplex or something.
I think the important part is everybody knows social signal really captures people safe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how that helps you if somebody's battering down your portcullis with a battering ram and pouring boiling oil on you, but I get the point. Like there are different security mechanisms there. I just don't think they work very well for a city. Maybe social mechanisms don't exist in a software city because we're abstracted away, right? Like we don't have direct interaction with anybody.
Are you worried that like creating a CKG will become a new target, right? Now.
Oh, that's a really interesting, I think that is really interesting. There is sensitive information in the CKG. And so in a way you're creating that, you need defenses around that, but I think it's worth it. Yeah, over here. shift left.
On the program, and I think, shift left is something that is in conjunction with other tools, resources. The dev training platforms is not meant to be. And I think, the way that it's been talked about, it seems as though some people are suggesting that it's only and the clear solution, which then, of course, we then look at that as and how effective it's been. That you can absolutely say, yeah, that's not effective, but in conjunction with other tools, it is effective, in my opinion. Super new, can tell in this space, but
How big's your backlog? See, that's the problem right there. That you just told me that your program has a problem. Okay.
But besides that, what I'm wondering a little bit about is the tool that you're talking about in terms of identifying vulnerabilities, the 5% that is exploitable.
Yeah.
Does your tool also take into consideration, like you said, softwares are always advancing, so is AI, so is all the types of attacks that there are. So does your tool take into consideration like really advanced attacks like all over the code, for example, that's like super advanced, but it's definitely on the rise. So is that something that is also considering like expectations to?
Yeah, so you shouldn't construe this talk as a pitch about contrast at all. This is, sort of related to our approach to AppSec, but we have a good set of sensors that do some of those things. But to really build this, you probably need multiple tools feeding into your CKG. You can't get all your context from one source, and so I think it's important that you have that diversity. That's how you keep up. And if a new risk emerges, then you probably need to create some more sensors. And, we have to stay ahead of the threat that way. But the good news is the threat doesn't move nearly as fast as people talk about. Like, it's mostly the same threats as there were in 2002. There's different iterations of the threats. Like there's a new CVE, but it's just old wine in new bottles. It's the same old underlying thing. Every once in a while, there's something new. And some of the new AI stuff is really interesting because it's new, like it's a new kind of computing. And so it has new kinds of risks. Yeah.
So at AppSec Cali, Jeremiah Grossman years ago talked about this same problem, essentially, that you want to only fix what's being exploited.
Yeah.
And the way he did it was show a graph, a Venn diagram, SASK, DASK, they're detecting all these things. The overlap is closer to what's being exploited, but not exact. And he came up with another mechanism for doing that. One of the things he thought of was talk to insurance companies of people who've been exploited. So I guess if you're a small company, you wait for the big companies to do it, take their data, you've got a really good hold on it. So I wrote an article. I was so impressed with what he'd done and did a little bit of research. And there was a paper that showed that if you configure the statistics on a CVE, you can get that up to a little bit over 50% of predictability. And a lot of people have tried, and it's really bad. So
Yeah.
There was another model that they used, and they could get close to 75%.
There's a few models. There's EPSS does some of that. Kev and Lev.
Exactly. So you have to use a mix. And the idea is to use some of that.
But why wouldn't you? Okay, so I get it. Also, Jeremiah was trying to sell DAS tools. So for him to say, yeah, he was, he's a white hat. All right, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point, I think, is why would you go to an insurance company to get data about other companies rather than instrument your own city and see who's attacking you specifically?
Sure, if you can get that.
Right. That's what I'm saying is you should monitor. It's not that complicated.
It's much more accurate. You can find out what's actually being exploited.
Yeah, I would like to see better sharing in our industry. And I think, so the things I mentioned earlier, EPSS is the exploit prediction scoring system, which is kind of cool. Uh, well, it's a little tough to know. I mean, it's good to have multiple different measures of this. You can also look at what's on the KEV, the known exploited vulnerabilities list. The danger there is, what if whoever's making that list doesn't know if it's been exploited or not, right? A lot of exploits, and particularly exploits for your custom code, are never going to be on the KEV. So you have to measure those in your own infrastructure. And I care more about custom code than I do about libraries. It's just a more interesting problem. But it's not that that's not both serious, but I think a lot of companies have over-rotated to focusing on CVEs and forget that their custom code is probably closer to their assets and probably more vulnerable than open source. Yeah.
So when you were looking into different elements around exploitability,
Yeah.
looking at how frequent different types of vulnerabilities occurred, were there particular attributes that stood out to you that were surprising as predictors of exploitability? So you mentioned earlier examples of like, if it's loaded in memory and it's in use,
Yeah.
right? But like, were there other variables or things that had a higher correlation to something that was actually being exploited in production?
So I use CVSS v4 for scoring, not because it's perfect, but because it's standard and it's good enough. Was
that using base scoring from CVS?
No, I use all the attributes, which is critical. Like, that's actually what I'm saying, is like the base score is like generic stuff. Like, this is just inherent to the vulnerability itself. It's the other 12, 20 factors that actually make it custom to you. And that's what I want you to populate in the CKG. Yeah. There are some things in the data that's kind of interesting. Like, attackers are pretty smart about what they attack. So like command injection, we barely ever see that vulnerability anymore. It's not very common for apps to call the operating system to run system commands, but it's a huge payoff. So it's disproportionately large in the attack set. It's like always in the top 5 attacks that we see, but it's way down the list in terms of the vulnerabilities that we find. And so it's kind of interesting to think about attacker calculus. What am I going to spend my time trying to find and get the biggest payoff? So like after Log4Shell came out, we saw crap tons of JNDI attacks because people were like trying to figure that out, because it's also another one where it's a big payoff. Yeah, question. Yeah, Jeff.
Would you have to have private companies share their own sensitive data? Wouldn't that be difficult to, because one company may have very specific vulnerabilities that you may have to have a diversified pool of companies sharing their own vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. Like, vulnerabilities are pretty much the same across companies, even across industries. When you look at the layout of what's, there's minor differences, but the big message is they're basically the same. And it makes sense because it's the same developers writing in the same kind of frameworks on the same kinds of systems. Generally, somebody mentioned SCADA earlier. That's a whole different animal and super interesting and terrifying. But mostly it's the same stuff. Let me go back here real quick. Yeah.
Thanks. I was wondering, for people who wanted to learn more about this, what's the next step in this talk? Like, do you have a book recommendation, blog, workshop? What should people go to next if they wanted to learn how to make this happen well?
Yeah, there's a lot of writing out there on runtime security. And that's really what I'm talking about, is how do you instrument your application layer? How do you instrument your city and gather that data and bring it together? There's a bunch of companies that are doing it. There's not a lot of literature out there that's like just kind of generic. Here's how to think about it. I wrote a couple of papers for DZone on how IAST and RASP work, and those might be a good place to start. They're I think they're called Intro to IAST and Intro to RASP. at D zone. And those will tell you how the technology kind of works for the sensor side of things. Building the CKG out of it. Yeah, I mean, CKG is a thing. Like, it's used in lots of different industries, and so there are lots of tools. Like, our infrastructure is built on Kafka for distributed data processing, and then we use Gremlin and to query our graph, which is built on Neptune, and so, like, those are some of the technologies that you'd want to learn about if you want to put this together. And I imagine you could cobble something together with your existing tools and your, some of the open source infrastructure if you wanted to, and start moving towards this path. You don't have to do it all at once. I think it's best to just start, building your graph out, and then every time you do something, you just want to make it a little better. And over time, it'll get great. There was one more, yeah. Yeah.
How can prioritize the security control in their code?
How can they prioritize security controls in their code? It's a really tough question. I don't know if it's possible at scale. And I say that. Yeah, so threat modeling I talked a little bit about, right? Like, I think the idea is to inform the threat modeling process with a great graph that describes how that application works. So it's then you can start your threat modeling process from a lot higher and more accurate position. One way to think about security is, it's constantly evolving. Like, most people think of it like, well, we want to get our security architecture set, pick our controls, and then we'll implement it, and then we'll go into production. But that's not the way businesses get built, really. Like, when you're really small and you've got a handful of users, you probably won't have that sophisticated security controls. But as your business model starts to work and you get lots more users, maybe you switch from a custom authentication scheme to now using Okta. And so you're going to be constantly like shifting the bar up as you get bigger and your security needs get bigger. And it's going to evolve over time. And it's not easy.
So can't we make changes in our policies for something?
Well, so making change through policy and expecting developers to respond is unlikely to work. In fact, that's kind of the essence of the castle approach. And I say this having written probably 50 secure coding guidelines in my life and trying to help develop. I was like, if we just write it down and tell them what to do and get the rules straight, then they'll do it, right? But they don't. I don't even know if anybody ever read those things. And it's frustrating, but one of the big challenges is if you try to write down those policies, you're going to write down something like all input should be validated. That seems inarguable, right? Problem is, it doesn't tell the developer squat about how to do it and really what fields need to be validated against what kind of specification, and what happens if a field doesn't validate right. What if there's an extra field? What if there's a missing field? What if there's a duplicate field? There's like a zillion ways that can go sideways. And so your policy doesn't help them get it done. You got to push it all the way down to their framework. So they're using, let's say, Spring Boot, and they want to use Spring value. Like all you want to say is you must validate all input. But what they need is a detailed spec on, we're going to use Spring validation. We're going to use it here. We're going to use an interceptor to catch these methods and force validation. And here's how the error handling is going to work. We're going to do validation on the client side as well as the server side. I mean, it just gets really complicated. And so no security specs go that low. And so they don't help developers.
But there are some tools available which we can integrate in our framework that will break that code.
There are what in your framework?
Some tools available that we can integrate in our framework.
Well, not as much as you'd think. I started a project at OWASP called ISAPI, the Enterprise Security API. And my idea was exactly that. Like every company should have a library of security methods that they use, and all the developers use those. So it's got validation and access control and encryption and logging and a bunch of other stuff in there, output encoding. And the idea was that, any developer could use those methods and they wouldn't have to write them themselves. But the problem is it's tough to get two frameworks to work together. So like ISAPI was kind of a framework, and like Spring Boot is a kind of a framework, and then they don't mesh together perfectly. And so someone's got to do that work. Who should it be? The developer? They don't know anything about security. Should it be the security person? They don't know anything about the framework. So it's like it ends up being really complicated just for the most obvious thing: validate your input. Everything else is harder than that. Access control, Jesus, it's a circus. And so I just don't think you can specify security up front. You can try, and then you have to still test it and fix it and evolve it over time. I'll leave you with this. Vin Diesel in the movie Knockaround Guys. Anybody? Okay. Vin Diesel. He says something, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but he says something like, it takes 500 fights to become a legitimate tough guy. That's when you can really consider yourself a street fighter. Something like that. And it sticks with me because I think the path to security is not the castle model where you figure it out up front and then you're secure from then on. I think it's the street fight model. It's the city model. It's dirty and it's ugly, and you evolve it over time, getting better and better through 500 street fights. There's still more questions. I'm happy to go questions. I'm here till tomorrow morning. So like I'll go because this is my favorite thing in the world to do. But if you feel like we've had it and need to go, I totally understand.